To the left, as you're looking at it, that's the oldest part of the castle, which is medieval, 11th to 13th century. And then over the next best part of 800 years, the castle was incrementally added to. The area which we call the kind of northeast court, which is the second court back, is 15th century, which we discovered quite late on in the process because of a first floor fireplace which they dated. And then it carried on in the 16th century, there's an area further back, and then in the 17th century, this southeast court, and then there were a series of 19th century additions. So there was always an ongoing kind of occupation. It was continually occupied throughout that period. I believe an American couple then bought it to operate a hotel in the 70s, and I think just as they were about to reopen after, I think, quite an extensive refurbishment, there was a fire which completely destroyed the castle, burnt out the roofs, destroyed the interiors. The Landmark Trust were interested in taking the property on, and they were looking to restore it, which is an interesting idea given its varying periods of construction. Restoring it to any one period obviously would have been problematic, and it was prohibitively expensive. I think it was about £10 million to restore it, and they couldn't possibly raise that kind of money. And they were advised, perhaps if they held an architectural competition, to look at a more contemporary house in relationship to the ruins. There might be another way of bringing Astley back into kind of at least current imagination, rather than it being completely lost to time. At competition stage, you could hardly walk in here. It was just completely overgrown, and pieces were falling down, so it wasn't safe. It was full of rubble and bits of timber. And then we used the contemporary construction to stabilise the ruin. So the outer walls, which wanted to naturally fall apart, the new brickwork and the concrete, precast concrete, sort of binds all that together back into a kind of stable shell, and then we then build into that with structural carpentry. So all of the new masonry sits on the historic wall lines and works to the historic spatial structure. And you'll see when we go into the house, all these edges, the shadows of the broken figure cast by like the broken edge of the fireplace inside. You're constantly aware of this sort of in a way, of the catastrophe of the house. We had effectively, we had two key ideas. One was to build the new house in the oldest part of the ruins, in the medieval core. And the second idea at the competition stage was to invert the house, to put the bedrooms on the ground floor. All of the rubble core in that got quite wet. So this was a kind of way of not taking timber right up to those walls, in case there's this residual moisture coming out over time. You certainly can't smell it, you can't really detect it, but it will carry on drying out over time. So we ended up with this sort of tiled border. Proportionally, we've probably got 60% of the masonry here was retained, and probably 40% is new construction. So that sort of gives it an interesting balance of the space. There's kind of more of equivalence between the kind of contemporary construction and the historic fabric that was retained. And we've therefore been able to kind of set a series of continuous pieces of new construction. The north wall behind the camera here was completely lost, and a lot of the south wall was also eroded, so we almost had this sort of the wall either side to work with. We were really keen that we kind of embedded the contemporary house within the historic medieval core, because for us it felt that it had continually been adapted and lived in, and simply this was a continuation of that process. And we didn't want to, in a way, we didn't want to kind of have the new house at a kind of distance to the historic fabric. We felt a lot of reasonably contemporary architecture in Britain had studiously restored historic buildings, which was one avenue, which is indeed one that the Landmark looked towards at first, or there'd be some very lightweight or highly differentiated construction which would sort of touch anything historic very lightly. It was quite a challenge to get them to agree to keep this as ruinous as it is. So you can see all the timber casements were left as they were, the paint, all the kind of edges, and from the outside it very much feels still like the kind of broken figure of the ruin. So the brickwork and the materials are tonally quite similar to the stone, but they're quite a kind of narrow gauge brick from the continent, from Denmark.
As it stood, it would have just decayed and disappeared, because for many years neither English Heritage nor anyone else wanted anything to do with it because of the costs. And I think that was the biggest problem. But when you think that several queens have actually stayed here, either by choice or not, it's a great shame to have lost a building that has got a historical value.
And now we've got a 21st century building within it.
That's right, it's one that can be used very, very well. It's tastefully done because of matching the brickwork to the stonework and the internal with all the woodwork. I think it's been a very, very good job.